Hey, welcome back to Brothers of the Arcana. As always, I am your host, Alex Aldea.
I am your co-host, Dave Ferrigno.
And I'm the guest, Jaime Paul Lamb.
Yes, he sure is. We have Jaime Paul Lamb tonight with us, and very, very thankful to have him. Our friend Tim Hogan, all credit goes to him for setting us up and having a little chat tonight with a very esoteric brother. He's a Mason. He's a bunch of other esoteric stuff, and he can go through some of that stuff that he's a part of as he wishes. But yeah, so I would say, if I were to describe Jaime, I'd say esotericist, hermeticist, tarot master. I don't know what the proper honorific for tarot guy is.
Yeah, tarotist maybe, or tarot reader, or what's
pterodactyl.
Yeah, I think there's what's it, cartomancy. So cartomancer would be the proper
cartomancer.
Yeah,
that's an interesting thing. So I will say that in preparation for this, I have brought all of my tarot decks. So I have here of all different kinds, and I have an oracle deck as well. So we can talk about some of that stuff as well. Very excited about it. And now I've gotten our friend Danny and Mo Gomez super into tarot, and they're super addicted, and they're just buying deck after deck after deck, and here we are. So it should be a lot of fun time, but we've been pulling a lot of cards and learning more about it. So I'd love to chat a little bit.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
So you used to be a punk rocker, is that correct?
Yeah, that's true. When I was, ever since I was probably 14 or something like that. Back on the East Coast, actually, I grew up in Connecticut. So in Fairfield County, which is basically, that's the tri-state area. And I used to go to a club called the Anthrax, was the name of it. Has nothing to do with that thrash band. The club was called the Anthrax, and it was like an all ages club, and I saw everybody you can think of who was around in the early to mid 80s, all the way through late 80s, really. Yeah, it was
that cool. Is freaking awesome. So, punk rocker turned occult scholar, let's call you. So, let me ask you this: what's the most raw lesson that you've learned in underground music, and does it fuel your approach to masonry and magic today?
I think they're somewhat related, because there's certainly like an ecstasis, there's like a primal kind of catharsis, and orgiastic ecstasy, I guess you might say, when you're slam dancing with all of these other kids who are, you're all teenagers, and there is kind of a physical element to it. At least there was back then with all the hardcore bands. But and then in performance, like playing music, it's very like, you have to dig deep into your, you have to kind of engage that energetic, ecstatic kind of Dionysian element,
I love it. When I think about Freemasonry, I think about orgiastic ecstasy too. We keep it right next to the green beans and
the rubber chicken, right?
And the rubber chicken
and the goat.
No, absolutely. That's interesting, because I mean, you think about the middle chamber lecture. At least I don't know if you have one in your state, but I think in Connecticut they did, where one of the main things upon 7 liberal arts and sciences is music, right? So music is a huge piece of it. Astronomy is another piece of it. They don't talk about astrology per se, but it's there in the movement of the stars and the orbits and the sort of esoteric meaning of it. But a lot of people kind of accuse modern esotericists of sort of sanitizing a lot of these ancient practices, making them like friendly for internet and friendly for Instagram and everything else. You've been a part of a lot of stuff. Talk to us a little bit about some of the most out there, or let's call it dangerous or taboo sort of rites that you've explored, and have you seen those same kinds of things whitewashed in more popular occult or esoteric circles?
Yeah, I think if you're getting into like Solomonic magic or the Goetia and stuff like that, it requires that you have what we now think of as a pretty antiquated worldview. It requires that you believe in an enchanted cosmos, a cosmos that accounts for entities and things. So if you have your typical, the worldview we're all born into as Westerners is kind of the materialistic, positivistic kind of worldview, where it's things can be weighed and measured, and the reality of a thing is based on how quantifiable it is. But there's the qualifiable is something different. The quality of things. It's like I think a good example would be like Pythagorean numerology. You have math or arithmetic, which we have on the quadrivium, but then there's this mystical component, a numinous component to number in Pythagoreanism. It's not just 2 + 2 = 4. It's 2 is the dyad, and there's a quality to that. It's not merely quantity. So, but that's what differentiates this sort of Pythagorean perspective on arithmetic from what you learn in school. Yes.
So
I forget the question though.
What would you say? So the question was basically a lot of stuff gets whitewashed in terms of like trying to make it smoothed out and more palatable so that people can talk about it. But magic is it's weird. It's out there. It's taboo. It's really kind of could be dangerous, right? So the whole idea of summoning demons or summoning whatever spirits, infernal or celestial, and the pluses and minuses of that kind of stuff.
Yeah, if you have that enchanted worldview and you're dealing with entities, goetic entities, let's say demons or daimones, right? Or angels, if you're working with some angelic, Kabbalistic sort of Shem HaMephorash angels, there's, I think the whitewashing, if I can call it whitewashing, is probably the psychologization of that. Like considering the 72 goetic demons as compartmentalized aspects of your psyche, like these compartmentalized entities, right? That are just quote unquote entities, but they're really, from the psychological perspective, they're really just aspects of yourself, which is funny because even in the Goetia, like the Mathers and Crowley one that you most likely encounter, in the preface or somewhere in there, and I wouldn't expect this, but Aleister Crowley even said these are aspects of the mind. So he even psychologized it. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure if he meant that or, if that was just something he was into at the moment. But I think that the whitewashing and the, making it palatable for the modern Westerner, would be to psychologize it, just like the tarot with Carl Jung. Carl Jung, I don't know if he wrote about the tarot, he was familiar with it, and he was familiar with astrology as well. But he was, of course, a psychologist, so he kind of took a different perspective on it than your typical, Greco-Egyptian magician in the Hellenistic era would approach it. I mean, because they have a different worldview. They have a worldview that accommodates, entities, like real objective entities. And
now, so let's settle this then, because you brought up an interesting point. Are there demons or are there not? Are they just a figment of our psyche, or are they for real?
I believe they're for real. I believe that they're objective realities that, they have their own ontological.
And you know that from moral certainty, so to speak?
I know that from my experience,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
which is all we can never really have.
I'm sufficiently sort of yeah, I'm acclimated to that kind of worldview now, and that took a lot of time to get there, and it took like me consciously doing that, and doing the actual work, like working with goetic entities or doing the perfect nature, for example, out of the Picatrix, doing these operations. And, there's kind of other ways, which you'll probably talk about with PD Newman, that you can contact these entities that, you can get into that with him, but that involve, entheogenic substances and things like that. But,
been there, done that.
Yeah.
Not as such, but I have talked to an alien. It was a mantid, and he did not have nice things to say.
Oh,
but apparently, maybe we'll tell that story. But that's an interesting one. So, Dave, you have any thoughts before I delve into other topics here?
Well, one thing I was going to say, this comes on the eve of, I'm sure you heard Dan Rivera, paranormal researcher that's been traveling around with the Annabelle doll, who they believe is possessed, obviously, by a demonic presence.
Is that the Warrens doll?
Yes.
From Connecticut.
Actually, correct. And Dan actually just passed away, I think, yesterday. And he's been on tour with the doll going around. I think he was in Gettysburg. So, my belief, I do also think, demons are real and the entities are out there. One thing I just wanted to ask before we switch gears, that, would you say, in this tarot world, is that a tool for divination? Is it, delving into human consciousness, or is there another connection to the universe when you're partaking in that?
I think it's kind of all of the above. I mean, there's a range to it, like the synchronistic component to it. You're drawing these cards while you're thinking about certain, maybe a question. You ask a question, you draw a card, and there's a synchronistic action there, right? So it depends on, how you're using the cards. You could use them for divination, of course. You can use them just for like meditation or contemplation, just to, you could use them like people would use an icon in like the Orthodox tradition. You use them as sort of a window, like icons are used. They're theurgical devices. And I think you could use the tarot like that. And there's the psychological aspect of it as well. You're also, when I say, I tend to like denigrate the psychological component, like whitewashing, like we were talking about. But I don't think psychologizing, I think that the psychological level is one level, and it works on that plane as well as other planes. So I think that that's a valid use of the cards.
So when we let's talk about tarot a little bit. So I got a couple of ones here. This one's called the I guess the stained glass tarot. It's a bunch of different stuff. It's kind of a cool, almost plasticky type of cards. You can see the part there. Got, of course, the Masonic tarot.
Oh yeah,
that's a lot of fun. The Tarot of Marseille.
That's my favorite.
Which is PD's. Yeah, that's PD's favorite. Apparently, he said he's a snob and only deals with that. The Tarot of St. Petersburg. This is very cool. We were talking about the Orthodox, so this has a lot more sort of Russian stuff. And I have a sort of Oracle tarot, which has some very interesting, like this type of work.
Yeah,
I would more shamanistic.
I would think that at some point we got to cease to call them tarot cards. If they deviate too far from what I mean, because tarot cards are a thing. If words mean something, then when we say tarot, that means that there's pips, there's court cards, and those constitute the minor arcana, and then there's 22 cards in the major arcana. I think it has to have that structure, I think, to be called tarot. But you're saying oracle deck, and I think that's accurate. I don't know how to use an oracle deck, and like Newman, I wouldn't say snobby about it, but I exclusively use the Marseille deck because you know what I like about it.
So
I was going to say there's strong imagery. It's real stark and austere. You know, they're like woodcutty and blocky, and they're just like, I think they're strong images, you know. And when it gets a little, you know, frilly and like prosaic, you know, it could start. Well, here's one commentary on that is like the Rider-Waite deck, which is probably the most popular tarot deck there is. The Rider-Waite deck has a lot of weight and Coleman Smith's kind of baggage attached to it. You know, it's not something that, you know, you're looking.
Talk more about that. What do you mean by baggage?
Well, you're looking through their lens, basically, because they designed this tarot deck, and it has, you know, the symbolism is sort of spoon-fed, as opposed to the Marseille deck, let's say. The Marseille deck is what it is, and it's you know, those cards speak to you on their level, you know. Whereas, you know, with the Rider-Waite, you could say that, you know, that Waite and Coleman Smith's kind of perspective is woven into the design elements there. So you're kind of looking through
so you're saying the Marseille deck's the cleanest, in other words, in terms of meaning, you know, it's not bogged down by any other extraneous interference, in essence, kind of thing.
Well, yeah, I guess there's you know, at some level, yes. But I mean, like, really, we start to look at occult tarot, and we can get into this for a second. Like, there was Antoine Court de Jabelin had this book in 1781 called the Le Monde Primitif, the Primitive World. And in that, I think it was book 13 or something like that, there was a man named Desmalais, and he was the first to attach to look at the tarot as, you know, an Egyptian vestige from the Library of Alexandria, and that they were somehow connected to the mysteries of Isis and Osiris, and that and he kind of attached he made the correspondence between the 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet and the 22 cards of the major arcana. So that's the first time you see that is in 1781, which is the same year Uranus was discovered. So, and it's right around the three big revolutions, right? That were very Masonic at their core: the American, the Bolivian, and the what was it? The French. There were three big revolutions around that time that were very sort of Masonically oriented. But anyway, so yeah, the tarot takes on its occult significance at that time. And then going forward, of course, you get people like Eliphas Levi and the, you know, Mathers and Westcott and the Golden Dawn sort of perspective on tarot, and Atelier, or, you know, Aliette. So there's, if I'm saying those, they're French. Like, I think he was Martinist, maybe.
Martinist, how scandalous. Yeah, you know what's funny? Most people think of tarot who don't know anything about tarot and just know it from the popular consciousness, from the Roma tradition or Gypsy tradition, right? As being something that is that sense of divination and so on. But I never hear any of the Western esotericists mention the Roma in this whole tarot debate. Now, is there a reason for that? Or did they just come upon it later? Are they just derivative of other traditions, or what?
I think that's different than the occult tarot. So the occult appreciation or application of the tarot, I think, is different from your typical Romani, like divination practices, reading tea leaves, or, I mean, that was just one of many. They could do that with a playing card deck just as well as a tarot deck. I mean,
Sure.
and you get gypsies and, and others who are sort of taking that tack, and I think that's super interesting, but I do think it's somewhat separate from when we start to attach correspondences, like occult correspondences, to the tarot, like you would see in Agrippa. Not that there's tarot in Agrippa, but I mean, like, Agrippa was a systemizer, basically. He was good at correspondences. He was good at making, the 7 planets and all the metals, the colors, and everything that corresponds to them. And I think when you see that, the body of correspondences being projected onto the tarot or corroborated with it or collated with it, I think that's when you begin to see this occult tarot, which is separate, I think, from the Romani tradition, which is more folksy and sort of divinatory. You know what I mean?
When you say, I think so. When you say correspondence, are you talking about the universal law of correspondence?
No, like correspondences, meaning there's 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, and each one of those correspond to a tarot card, and the elements, the planets, and the signs of the zodiac are also fitted to correspond with the tarot. So, like, for example, if you take the Wheel of Fortune card, right? The Wheel of Fortune card corresponds to Jupiter, and its letter is Kaf. The Hebrew letter is Kaf. The gematria value of Kaf is 20, it's 20. And because it's Jupiter, you might attach the color blue, which corresponds to Jupiter in the Queen's scale. So there, we've taken one tarot card, and it's Jupiterian, it's blue, it's the number 20, it's the Hebrew letter Kaf, and Kaf means, I think it means like open hand. So that's what I mean by correspondences. Like, each tarot card has a body of meaning that, like, if you're a proficient occult tarot reader, then you've committed all this to memory. In fact, you'll look at any one of these cards and you won't even have to like consciously think about it. Those images will be sort of attached. Those correspondences will be attached. But this leads to an interesting problem, is that, and I've discovered this, and it's happened with me, is the over intellectualization of it, where it becomes this mnemonic exercise, which is great. And as Masons, we love mnemonic exercises, right? And feats of memory and things like that. So I think that's, well, I can digress right there and say that I think that's the principal labor of all Freemasons. I think the most important thing we do is the mnemonic work, because by memorizing, we're erecting that mnemonic temple. We're literally building the metaphysical temple when we do memory work. Memory work, I'm with Dixon and Bruno and all of these people, where it's like, I think Hermetic and occult memory work is some of the most important, and Masonic memory work is some of the most important things we could do. But
why?
Because we're creating the temple. So here, so Freemasonry. A lot of people, like, you might have a hard time if you go to a lodge and you're like, what is Freemasonry? They will say a system of morality, something illustrated by symbols, and that whole like Prestonism or whatever.
An allegory illustrated with symbols, right?
Yeah. So that's an intellectually lazy way to say that, right? I think if one were to invest a little thought into it and find what are those things that Freemasonry is that you can't take away and still have Freemasonry, that would be the idea that a Freemason is a speculative or metaphysical temple builder. That's the only thing that a Freemason that differentiates a Freemason from somebody else, and thereby differentiates Freemasonry from some other thing, because Freemasonry is the art of metaphysical temple building, just as operative stonemasonry is, the physical quarrying, raising, dressing, fitting, and, worked stone in accordance with some designs on the trestle board. But the metaphysical component to it, because a Freemason is just a metaphysical stonemason. And I think you can't take away metaphysical temple building and still have something called Freemasonry. So Freemasonry must be speculative, that is to say, metaphysical temple building. If it's not that, then it's not Freemasonry. If it's anything else, then that's just extra Masonic stuff, But you can't have Freemasonry.
Usually involving a silly hat of some kind or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah. So I think, and the mnemonics feed into that, that's why I say I view that as our chief labor. Memory work is our chief labor because that's where we do most of our metaphysical temple building. And I don't know, I think we started with, it is interesting, but it's like also how many people think about that? How many Freemasons I'll bet you know a lot of Freemasons who don't even know what Freemasonry is.
True.
Probably probably way more than those that do. Isn't that sad and weird?
Well, there's a lot of them that focus on the fellowship aspect, or a lot of these, especially.
You could take that away, though.
Coming in.
You could take away the fellowship aspect and still have Freemasonry. We're talking about the irreducible sort of essence of Freemasonry. It's one thing.
I had a friend who was almost bemoaning the fact he happens to be Lebanese, and
I am too. I'm half.
Oh, cool. Yeah. So he's really good guy. But he's not as
despite the fact that he's Lebanese.
No. That's completely. I got lots of Lebanese friends. I don't want to piss them off. But no, he's got a lot of ties to Lebanon and to Europe, where they do masonry very differently. Sure. And he's saying, well, he was sort of bemoaning the fact that, well, why are we more political in America with our masonry and getting more involved and stuff like that? I go, it's like, I wish we had more of these guys that were high-end, political operators and power brokers and stuff. And I said, I almost am thankful that that's not the case, on a certain level, because it's kind of like those guys, they're not in it for the aspects of becoming better or, making themselves, building their inner temple. They're into it for very terrestrial things. So I mean, maybe I'm making a prejudiced sort of comment there too. So, I'm cognizant of that, but it doesn't seem like that's what masonry is about. Masonry is about the esotericism, the metaphysics.
I think it's a metaphysical art. Yeah.
Now, Tim Hogan will say that it's an antediluvian religion remnant.
I like that. I love talking to Tim about that particularly. In fact, I saw him downtown Phoenix maybe a year or two ago, but we had a very long conversation about that. And then we had him on this other podcast and talked to him specifically about that. I think that's a great idea. Now, that's the thing about Tim, is that he's able to find these little chestnuts that, despite they're hidden in plain sight. So he just looked in Anderson's constitutions and saw where it said, Freemasonry is basically an antediluvian vestige of, knowledge before the flood, So like basically he's saying, I think this lines up with a lot of what you might read in Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval and John Anthony West and Robert Schock and those people. that, if there was like a comet impact on the Laurentide or Wisconsin ice shelf, and there was a 400-foot rise in sea level about 12,000 years ago, most people live near the coast. So of course they would be wiped out, and there would be this proliferation of flood myths, of course, because there actually was a flood. And then, but there's the survival of the two pillars, the pillars of Seth, the pillars of Hermes, the pillars of Lamech, and on these two pillars, one was meant to withstand the conflagrations of fire, and the other one, the inundation of water. So you have sometimes it's a brass one and a stone one, and on these sort of pillars are inscribed this antediluvian knowledge. And of course, that's just an allegory, right? But I think there was...
Is it though?
Well, two actual pillars. I'm not sure if there actually were two. That could be. I don't think there's a way to sort of falsify that, though.
So as a Romanian, I will say, so the Romanians, at least in popular mythos, are the successors of the Dacians and the Romans, the coupling of the Dacians and the Romans. When the Romans took over Dacia and they killed Decebal, who was the final king of the Dacians, and took over, the Emperor Trajan commemorated that victory through Trajan's column, which sits in the middle of Rome. And so the tradition of recording history on columns, I mean, that seems to me to be very plausible.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. So if you were to find that or anything approaching a proof about that, you might find it in Tobias Churton's book on the pillars, which I read a couple of years ago. It's came out just a couple of years ago, but I think it's called Pillars of Enoch or something like that. But there's a really good book about the possible survival of these very pillars, these very columns. Yeah. And
Churton. Yeah. The lost pillars of Enoch.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's basically, he gets into a lot of what Tim's talking about there. Tim takes a different sort of angle on it, and I like both, but yeah, I think it's interesting to think that, our tradition, our system, our metaphysical temple building is something that, maybe it is a survival of some sort of antediluvian knowledge in some way. I just think it's an interesting proposition, right? And Tim's doing work on that. Churton's done some work on it, and I'm watching those guys closely, So,
what about a guy like Brian Murarescu, who wrote the Immortality Key? Have you read much on that? Do you know that background there a little bit?
I know about it, but I haven't read the book lately. But
it's fascinating. It opened me up again to the whole metaphysics debate. Well, that and The Game of Life and How to Play It by Florence Scovel Shinn. If you know that one, it's a bit more basic, but it's a wonderful, wonderful book on metaphysics. Right. He posits, Murarescu does, that because he went to the Vatican Secret Archives, he went to the archives of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, or the modern version of the Inquisition, right, and a bunch of other archives and libraries in the Vatican and otherwise, and to try to come up with this theory that he had, that basically Christianity is a holdover from Dionysian cults to some extent, whether in whole or in part, and that the Eucharist was at one point psychedelic, sure, because of the ergot fungus in the faulty maintenance of grain and wine, right, and that most of the priesthood of Christianity was female originally. Oh, because of the So some interesting ideas there. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that stuff. I mean, yeah, I think it's cool. I mean, that goes back, of course, you can go back to who's the guy who did the mushroom and the cross, Allegro.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Like, that basically mushrooms are responsible for our uplifting, basically.
Well, yeah. the stoned ape hypothesis.
A stoned ape hypothesis.
So there's that, which is great. And, we have Terence McKenna to thank, I think, largely for that. But, there's I think there's a lot there in terms of the Amanita muscaria mushroom, let's say, and how that relates to Siberian shamanism and how that might be some of that imagery kind of made its way into the Yule Christmas tradition, I think there's something there. Have you ever looked into that?
No, talk more about that. What's the deal with that?
Okay, so if you look at the Amanita muscaria mushroom,
which is a part of magic mushroom,
yeah, and it's a red cap with white polka dots on it, basically. And these are found beneath the fir tree. So if you look at the fir tree, they grow underneath the fir tree, just as little red and white presents. And the reindeer come up and they eat these mushrooms, and they metabolize it, because then you collect the reindeer piss and you drink it ceremonially in this shamanistic ritual, and then you're a flying reindeer, because it's like, I guess I'm not making this up. This is but there's more to it. Like, the shaman would enter through.
But wait, there's more.
Yeah, the shaman would sort of enter through the chimney, and there's all of these things about Christmas and reindeers and Amanita muscaria mushroom, and that mushroom. I think some people made it align with Mithraism as well. That Mithraism had some sort of entheogenic rite with the Amanita muscaria mushroom involved in it. And, us as Westerners, I think we were a coin toss away from being a Mithraic society, right? Because if you look at the preferred cult of the Roman legionaries was Mithraism, not Christianity. So they could have, whoever it was, Constantine or whoever made that call at some point, could have just as easily said, no, let's go with Mithraism as opposed to Christianity as the state religion. And I think it was just basically it was chance. We could just as easily, instead of having crosses and stuff everywhere, we can have the cave with Mithras and the Tauroctony, Mithras on the bull with his short sword in the bull's shoulder, and the zodiacal configuration around it, and Cautis and Cautopates, which are those two solstitial Saints John, basically, who are on either side of the Tauroctony there. One of them has his torch up, the other one has his torch down, which could be sort of symbolizing the winter and summer solstices, and how the sun is at its declinations at the tropics, Cancer and Capricorn. And there's a bunch of stuff with that Tauroctony. Like, if you look at it, it's Mithras on a bull, and underneath the bull, there's a serpent, a dog, and a scorpion who's the scorpion's grabbing onto the testicles of the bull, basically. But if you look at that, it's in the same configuration of the constellation Perseus, who's on top of Taurus, right? And then if you look 180 degrees on the other side of the ecliptic, you find that there's Serpens, the snake, Canis Major, the dog, and Scorpio right there. So it's it couldn't possibly be chance, So yeah, that Tauroctony is really loaded with cool stuff. And Porphyry made a big deal about it as well in his Cave of the Nymphs, where Porphyry was talking about the Cave of the Nymphs sequence from the Odyssey. So it was Homer's Odyssey. And in, I want to say it was book 10 or book 13, where Odysseus gets stuck near Ithaca, or close to, he was on his way to Ithaca. That's where he's from. But he awakes in this cave that had an entrance to the north and an entrance to the south. And Porphyry.
Talking about Polyphemus's cave?
No, not the Cyclops guy. This is the cave of the nymphs. There were water nymphs and there, naiads. There were naiads in this cave, and Porphyry does a nice sort of interpretation of it, which was a talent of the Neoplatonists when they looked at Homeric myth. You know, they did a lot of great interpretations, whether they're astrotheological or otherwise. This one happens to be kind of astrotheological because it has to do with the zodiac and the soul's ascent through the spheres, through the planets and the zodiac simultaneously, you know. So it's a very involved thing, and there's some celestial mechanics to it. So it's not something that I could just give you a sentence on, but and have it make sense. But it's a really, really cool device, right? And I think, because I deal with a lot of astrology, I do a lot of astrology, and yeah, and I particularly like Hellenistic and medieval Perso-Arabic and Renaissance astrology. So astrology before 1700, so I guess traditional astrology is what we say. And I stop at 1700 because that's when you have the, we were talking about, when we started this call, we were talking about the Enchanted worldview and the sort of materialistic, positivistic worldview. And at around 1700 is where you see the wholesale shift into materialism because of the Copernican revolution and other things, right? So anyway,
yes, I did.
I kind of went down a path there, and but yeah, the Cave of the Nymphs, it's an astrotheological allegory.
You bring up some very interesting parts. So you start talking about the Neoplatonists. What about the pre-Socratics? So it seems to me that, or at least some people have made the argument that there's a wave of this sort of Mithric, pre-Socratic cabal that's trying to take down Western civilization, and because they never thought that the Platonist Aristotelian version of the world is the right one.
Well, the pre-Socratics wouldn't think that because there was no Plato or Aristotle yet, so they wouldn't.
Correct.
Yeah.
So some interesting. I don't remember. There was a word for it that maybe it'll come to me. But so there's competing worldviews, competing egregores, if you will, for what things are. So now with the rise of the age of Aquarius, do you foresee more spiritualism coming back or more magic coming back into the world?
Oh, absolutely. I think we're at a critical impasse right now. We're at the opposite pendulum swing, you know, because if you look particularly, let's put it in the context of Rosicrucianism. When you get the emergence of Rosicrucianism, these are people who are holding on to the Enchanted worldview. They still have vestiges of a cosmos that is alive, that is animated and is vital, and is peopled by all sorts of entities, you know, angels, demons, jinn, etc. And if we're talking about, so Rosicrucianism sort of emerged at that point as the old world was dying. Rosicrucianism emerged, right? And now we've gone as far as we can go with the positivistic materialism, basically nihilism. So when you see people like Neil deGrasse Tyson or Stephen Hawking or Michio Kaku or all of these Deepak Chopra and people like that, these are like evil nihilistic entities, right? These people are they're atheists and they're nihilists, and they're like totally against the process of enchantment. So anyway, so I think we're at the other end of that pendulum swing where now we've hit a wall with our materialism, and we're coming up to some problems that have to do with do we accept a degree of numinosity, you know, the numinal, the enchanted? Do we accept that the cosmos is is alive and ensouled, do we accept that there is an anima mundi, the soul of the world, right? So,
the musica universalis. Yes.
Sure. So as an expression of it, yeah. And then, so now Rosicrucianism stands at this point where we now have an opportunity, and this is, I think, Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism are important because they're a Trojan horse of the Enchanted worldview, essentially, a metaphysics, right? So now we have an opportunity for Freemasonry and Rosicrucianism to do the rest of its promise. And its promise is to bring about, it's millenarian, right? Because it's about bringing about a shift in consciousness, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, in that way, there's an eschatology to it, right? And I think it's really interesting that, I think the best way to say it is it's the promise of Rosicrucianism is that we have that now, that opportunity, and I would say, I would say, we could at this point get into quantum physics and psychology, right? But I don't think that's the way to go. I think that's more nihilism, because quantum, if you explain away magic by having recourse to quantum physics or something like that, it's no longer metaphysical. Quantum physics is of physics, right? It's material, right? So if you're going to psychologize
it, in a sense, and I mean, I have a small lecture that I do on quantum physics, vibration, and masonry, and the whole idea of how it's all sort of linked through the metaphysics is, you're dealing with quantum entanglement and how that works. Like, it's not explainable in science. Like, how does this stuff happen irrespective of time and space? It has to be metaphysical. There's no other. So you're going through the nihilism, but the nihilism then takes you back out to the not the religious, but to the godly, because there's nowhere else to go.
Yeah. So why would they then use the language of physics, a language that simply doesn't apply to a metaphysics? I think they should use the language of magic. I mean, what is magic? Magic is the Picatrix has a good definition of magic. It's occult causality, basically. Occult causality, meaning there's a causal force that you can't account for, and if you did account for it, it would cease to be magic. If you did psychologize it or quantumize it or whatever, maybe if there's a quala, sometimes they'll talk about a quala because you have quanta, and if there is a quala, then that would be metaphysical, and I think that would be acceptable. But if you explain magic by using the language of physics, whether it's quantum or theoretical, whatever, it ceases to be magic. It has to be occult. It has to be hidden, and it has to be sort of ineffable for it to qualify, or else it's not magic anymore.
So what do you say to a guy like Yuval Noah Harari, who wrote *Sapiens* and *Homo Deus*, and basically he's a guy like, I learned Vipassana. He's been doing Vipassana his whole life, but it's not gotten him to any place that's really all that relevant, because he takes about a page and a half or 2 pages at the beginning of *Sapiens* and says, well, we're talking about quantifiable stuff. You can't quantify the souls. There go. It doesn't exist. Let's move on. And then basically he just dismisses the whole idea of the soul right off the bat and just talks about the terrestrial and the matter-driven stuff.
Yeah,
which I think completely misses the point. But
that's nihilism.
Right.
Yeah, that's atheism and nihilism. Yeah. Which, whatever. I mean, if you're into that, that's totally cool. I'm not. But
I'm not either. No.
Yeah.
I don't think any of us are here. But so I can't speak to Rosicrucianism because I don't know. Because I'm not, frankly. But in Martinism, you have the idea of reintegration.
Sure.
So the idea of going back to to what that looks like in reintegrating back into God in the ways that that can be done.
Right.
So I don't know if Rosicrucianism is similar to that or not or what, but we talked with Mark Stavish about we did almost like a survey course in all this other stuff. But you seem to have some very interesting ideas. So I'm going to ask you the same question that I asked Chuck Dunning a little bit, and that is, can you do? And I know my buddy Steve's going to bicker with me about this, but can you take a left-hand path philosophy through life and still attain what we think of as enlightenment?
There's some things would have to define there, like a left-hand path. I'm not sure exactly what that is.
Well, so a lot of people talk about left-hand path being synonymous with either Satanism or Luciferianism, or something along the line of OTO, where Crowley says, well, do what thou wilt is the whole of the law, as opposed to do what thou wilt but do no harm, which is more of the Wiccan idea or the Druidic idea. So basically I kind of don't want to define it because I don't want to put my particular prejudices on the question.
Sure.
To sort of pollute what we're talking about here, but let's call it not the traditional Orthodox, and I don't mean large Orthodox, I mean small Orthodox idea of religion and moving through that way. So yeah, the opposite of that, so to speak.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little unclear on what the moralizing force is in there in terms of what makes things. I guess if you're using it for evil, is that what we mean by you're using it for personal gain? You're using it for materialistic?
Yeah, I think the left-hand path usually is more, the self. It's not really aligned with God. It's almost like you are God. And it's, you're rejecting dogma and, traditional societal norms and moral norms and that sort of thing. I think, Alex, would that be a good way to summarize?
Yeah, I would say it's an egoistic tradition on some level, rather than trying to either transcend the ego or do away with the ego. It's almost, I guess, it's just the acknowledging of the ego and saying, I want shit that's awesome. I want a Ferrari. I wanted this. I wanted that. And I'm going to use black magic potentially could go into it. Other thoughts of that kind. Everything that sort of says that.
Well, Goetic magic, Solomonic magic. So Solomonic magic necessarily deals with demons. You have to. You're an exorcist and a magician as a Solomonic operator. You're dealing with demons. So I think a lot of people would say right there that will qualify as a quote unquote left-hand path. If you're dealing with demons, that's and maybe there's some sort of Faustian bargain going on. Who knows what? Because you do make deals. It even says in the Goetia, you kind of make deals with them. It's a tit for tat kind of thing. So you do get the knowledge imparted upon you from this entity, a demon, right? But you have to, insulate yourself against it. And these are, if not outright evil, some of them are very chaotic forces. Some of them are completely harmless. If you look through the significations of all of these, the 72 demons of that Goetic system, which I just wrote a book about that, and the 72 angels of the Shema Mephrash, and how they work together. And they each correspond to a 5-degree arc segment of the ecliptic. Because if you take 360 degrees of our ecliptic and you divide it up into 72 equal parts, then they're 5 degrees each. And each of those 5 degrees of the ecliptic, or 6 per zodiacal sign, so every zodiacal sign would have 6 of them. So you would have an angel and a demon who have dominion over that quinary. It's called a quinary. So you could use that angel as early modern angel magicians would do. People like Dee and Thomas Rudd, etc. Maybe even people like William Lilly, who was really more known for his astrology, but was, I believe, also an angel magician. Maybe even Elias Ashball, because he was
What
in
about
that.
Blake?
Perhaps, yeah. These people were in that milieu, right? So what they would do is they use the 72 angels of the Shem HaMephorash directly in concert with the 72 demons of the Ars Goetia, and they would have, like, for instance, on their layman that they would wear, they would have on the outside, they would have the seal of the demon, and on the inside they would have the sigil of the corresponding angel. So you would be there's a word that they used for, other than insulated, they would be, the demon is basically bound by that angel. So the demon can't, you don't get that sort of, that chaotic feedback, that you could get from just dealing with a demon. So anyway, I know that we're straying from this left-hand path thing, but I think that's a good example of, I think a lot of people would say dealing with demons is a left-hand path, right?
Yeah, potentially, if you call it that, sure.
Yeah. So, and they are demons, but let's take the etymology of the word demon. Right, it comes from daimon, and it's Greek, and it means a genius. Basically, it's not an evil entity per se. It's just an entity, but it's the genius of a thing. Like there were demons that they a lot like nymphs. Like every town would have its demon. Every person has a demon, a personal daimon, right? That's what Iamblichus calls it, a personal daimon. And you would, I think one of the chief aims of this sort of practice is to discern who your personal daimon is, what planetary sphere does it affiliate with, because each of there's 7 species of these sort of personal daimones, and they each correspond to one of the 7 planetary spheres in the old Ptolemaic Chaldean system. So once you find out the planetary sphere that your daimon is affiliated with, and you can find out the name of your daimon as well, and that's in Agrippa. You could read that in Agrippa, and it's using your nativity, that is to say your natal chart, and you can deduce the name. It's a process, but it's something I've done it several times. I've taught other people how to do it. In fact, Mark Stavish, I did a course for Mark Stavish's Institute of Hermetic Studies on this, where everybody who was in that course, we established their demon and the planetary affiliation and the name, or I at least taught them how to do it. We didn't do it for everybody because you don't ever want anybody to know the name of your daimon. So, because it's a personal thing.
Is it only so that daimon would have a name that's only yours, or does that daimon have the same name for each person that's born on that day?
It's a peculiar name. So, in order to
it's idiosyncratic, I guess.
Well, the way it's generated is from your nativity, and it's in a very a very personalized way, because you take them. Here's basically what you do. You figure out where all of the 7 planets were in the zodiac, and you take those 360 degrees of the zodiac, and each one of those degrees, you put the letters of an alphabet. It could be the Hebrew alphabet, it could be the Greek, it could be the Roman, and you wrap that around the ecliptic. So let's say if you've got the Hebrew alphabet, you're going to have 22 letters, and then it's going to begin again at Aleph, and end at Tav, Aleph, Tav, Aleph, Tav, and it's going to go all the way around the ecliptic. Every place where you have a planet in your chart, and it by the way, it starts at your ascendant. That is your rising degree, the degree of the zodiac that was on the eastern horizon at the moment of your birth. You start there with Aleph, and then you go around the whole zodiac, putting that alphabet. It should go about 15 times. It goes around about 15 times. Then you look at where your planets are, and you extract that letter. For every place you have one of your 7 planets, you extract that letter. And then you order those letters by the amount of essential dignity that those planets have in your chart. That is to say, the amount of essential dignity is like the strength of that planet based on its position in the zodiac. So then you take that, and that's how you order the letters. And then at the end, you put either Ya, that is Yod He, or El, which is Aleph Lamed, right? Because that makes it angelic. If it's Ya or El, like look at the name Daniel or Gabriel, it's El is always at the end of these angel names because it's of God, basically.
Michael.
Yeah.
Right.
So you take those 7 letters from your particular nativity, your natal chart, you order them by their essential dignity, and you put either Ya or El at the end, and there's your personal daimon name, basically.
And then what do you do with it?
You use that in ritualism to connect with that daimon, who is this personal psychopomp guiding you out of the underworld, because that daimon brought you here. So let me get into that, because this is a crucial.
Yeah, please.
So let's go back to Plato's Republic. And this goes before that as well, but let's go back to the Republic, and you'll find that in book 10 of the Republic, there's a story that is sometimes called now the Myth of sequence. It's the Myth of that's in the 10th book of the Republic, and it talks about a near-death experience that this guy had. When he was, quote-unquote, dead on the pyre, right, he saw all of these souls, and how souls are coupled with their demon, and how they come into existence in the world, right? So basically, when you choose your daimon, because you choose in your the pre-incarnate human soul chooses its daimon outside of the cosmos. So the soul is outside of the sphere of the fixed stars and zodiac. It's out there, right? The soul chooses its daimon. That daimon then guides the soul down through the 7 planetary spheres. And at each of those spheres, the soul takes on what Porphyry called astral garments. These are planetary accretions that the soul takes on, as garments of the soul. So as your daimon is guiding you down like a psychopomp, your daimon, like Hermes, like the senior deacon, your soul is getting guided down through these 7 planetary spheres, at each of which it's taking on these planetary accretions, which are vices and virtues, basically. 7 vices, 7 virtues, whatever. And you basically, they're bestowed upon you at each level. And by the time you're incarnate on the terrestrial sphere, the sublunary sphere, because it's below the moon, the sphere of the elements. So you've already gone through these etheric spheres, like Aristotle would call them the ether. They're composed of ether, these celestial spheres. And then you're down in the natural elemental world, the sublunary sphere, and you have all your planetary accretions. Now you find out your personal daimon, you do the work from your nativity to find how do you get back is the question, right? So you have to deduce your daimon. You have to calculate. There's a calculation for this. There's actually several, but I know a particularly rigorous one that I like, and it's one that I teach. Right. So you find out the planetary affiliation of your daimon. You find out its name, and then using that method that I was just talking about that was in Agrippa. And then you could start working with that daimon, like Iamblichus talks about this. Your daimon will show you its manner of petitioning it and placating it and whatever, or dealing with it, working with your daimon. When you work with your personal daimon, that entity can guide you up through the celestial spheres without tasting death. So you can die and do it. When you die, you're going to do it anyway, but you could do it while living. Macrobius talks about this long ago. And the soul, as a psychopomp, then guides you back up like Hermes would do. Hermes Mercury would always guide the soul back up out of the underworld. We're in the underworld right now. So,
Are we?
yeah, we're in the sublunary sphere. So in that old cosmoconception,
What are we doing here?
well, I mean, that's, what are we doing here? I mean, I don't
What are we
know.
doing here, Jamie?
A podcast.
That's
Shut up, Dave. What are we doing here, Jamie?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the goal of this project is, But all right, one way I've heard it answered, I don't have my own answer for this. One way I've heard it answered is that we're here as sensory organs of the Most High, essentially.
Yes.
That we're here to experience the universe, the cosmos, and to essentially report our findings. So that's about the best answer.
That's maybe what the Akashic records are for.
Yeah, that's about the best answer I've heard, is that we're just like the sensory organs of God, essentially, and experiencing the cosmos as his creation, you might say. So anyway, so you hook up with your daimon and he guides you back up through. And if you've read the Corpus Hermeticum, the Pymander or the Poemandries, that first book of the Corpus Hermeticum, they normally put it as the first one. It's sometimes called the Hermetic Genesis because it has a very similar account to Genesis with the firmament and the waters of the deep and et cetera, and the face of the deep. Anyway, so there's a point in there where it talks about the soul ascending through the 7 planetary spheres, and they even do it in order. They go the moon, Mercury, Venus, the sun, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and then the sphere of the fixed stars in the zodiac. So, and it says at each of them, if you look in the Pymander, it says at each of them, the soul relinquishes those garments that we were talking about. This is found all over the place. Like if you look at the
Is
myth
this
of
the Inanna story of going down?
I was just going to say the myth of Inanna. Yeah, so it's basically that same thing, and it's because the Chaldeans, they knew about the 7 planetary spheres. If you look at the temple at Borsippa, so Inanna, Ishtar, whatever, the temple of Borsippa was a 7-tiered mastaba, and you find that they had this, I think, in the Haranians too, the Sabians of Haran. I think we're doing this same operation, right? Where, just going up through those 7 planetary spheres and relinquishing vices.
Yeah, but then you got to worry about a rescue gala, right?
Yeah, so she was dismembered and hung on hooks in whatever their hell is, right?
Ideally, you don't want to do that.
Right.
Dave likes that kind of thing, but only in his spare time.
I just don't dismember people.
Right.
Man. Dave, you have any thoughts on this? You want to ask anything on this in particular?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely got pretty deep there.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
I love
I was
that.
just gonna ask from an astrological perspective. I know you alluded to the fact that materialism's really taken over, and this is going back, it's probably like a half hour now. What would you say, from your perspective, how could we apply astrology? Like, how does that intersect Freemasonry and other occult practices? And then, how does modern day astrology with horoscopes and everything, what's missing from that? Because it sounds like that ancient astrology would be much more attuned from what the discussion we just had.
So astrology could be used in a lot of different ways, right? There's a couple that I really like. I like horary astrology, which is question-based astrology. if you ask a question at the moment that, as the astrologer, at the moment that I understand that what that question is, I cast a chart for that moment. So there's a synchronistic component there because it's divinatory. I cast a chart for that moment, and then that chart, I delineate that chart. That is to say, interpret that chart, and that gives you the answer to the question. I view that as a sort of hermetic collapse, right? Because when I understand that question, there's a collapse. There's like, and I don't like physicalizing things, as you probably know, but I will say it's like a waveform collapse at that moment. And I look at it more like a condensation of hermetic gnosis, you know,
a catabasis, so to speak.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. Going up, I think. No, down. Catabasis is up, or down. Anabasis is up. Catabasis.
Anabasis, right.
So, anyway, there's. Go on.
Sorry, go ahead. Catabasis is about doing ash work, like that's Iron John. That's the whole thing of the young prince going into the ashwork and ending up the wise king.
Oh yeah, I've heard about that. Right?
Anyway,
Is that basically the same stuff as I haven't read Iron John, but it's
fascinating. You should. Robert Bly.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to check that out because it's reminding me of the Golden Bough and the king. You know, the killing of the old king and the installation of the new king. But,
it's true grokking in essence.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I took you off your. Please go ahead.
Oh, it's fine. What were we? What was
Dave? Back to you.
No, we were just talking about astrology and the intersection with Freemasonry and Hermeticism.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I remember. So there's some, I like traditional astrology, like I said, everywhere from the 2nd century BCE up through up to about 1700 CE. That is to say, Hellenistic astrology, medieval Perso-Arabic astrology, and Renaissance astrology. I thought all that was great. And I've done a lot of work studying that stuff, and I teach it with Mark Stavish and stuff. But I like horary astrology because that's a very useful astrology. Like where are my car keys? I could do that. Does she like me? Whatever. I could do one of those, you know. And I do this for people. Like I'll answer horaries for people. But the other thing I like is electional astrology. So we were talking about ritualizing interactions with your daimon, let's say. Your daimon, like I've been saying, has a planetary affiliation. So if that planet that your daimon is affiliated to is screwed up, is debilitated in at that moment, you wouldn't want to work with that. So basically, you're looking for electional astrology is looking for the most auspicious astrological moment, because astrology is a study of meaningful time, right? And time is like something.
That. Never heard that before.
Time is something that's, you know, time is a great mystery, right? And the way that, like the Greeks had a few words for time. They had chronos, right, which is like clock time. They had ionic time, which is like AION, which is like precessional long periods of time, like ages and things like that. But then in the middle, there's chironic time, and chironic time, the kairos, is the definitive moment. You know, like the kairos is here's how they explain it anciently. They use the archer analogy. When the archer draws back his bow and he feels the good amount of tension, and he's breathing, and he sets the bow on his sight of whatever the object is. And when all of those metrics come into, you know, order, then he lets slip the bowstring. That moment when he when everything is in order and he releases the bowstring is the kairos. So astrology helps us in working out chironic moments. You know, when is the best time for me to call this person? You know, when is the best time for me to engage in this ritual with my personal daimon? That's electional astrology, because you're electing a time to do something. And the other thing I like, so I talked about horary astrology. I talked about electional astrology, which is magical astrology. You know, you'll find that astrology is all over the grimoire tradition, electional primarily. And another thing I like is natal astrology. Now, I don't mean navel gazing, self-centered, digging corn through your shit astrology. I'm not talking about like, you know, putting your head up your ass and like checking yourself out. I think that's, I'm not talking about that hippie garbage 20th century natal astrology. I think it's trash, right?
Geez, Jamie, tell us how you really feel.
But
Trash.
well, it is like a garbage astrology, because it's you know, anyway, it's like so self-centered and arrogant, right? It's narcissistic, right? But I think there's something to knowing your nativity and knowing your transits, how planets are transiting your nativity, current planets transiting your natal placements. So your chart has your natal placements, like Saturn was in the 15th degree of Libra, let's say, or whatever, right? Everybody has their own planetary configuration. They have their own cosmic thumbprint, basically, right? And the planets are in their dance now. They're transiting your natal planets, and there are good times to do things. There are bad times to do things. There are times when you have cosmic momentum behind your whatever you want to do, and there are times where you're sort of cosmically doomed. So, and if you were to instigate or incite some sort of action, it would be doomed to fail, because you're against it's not the kairos. It's anti-chironic, I guess. So
let me ask you this before you go on. So you keep saying Cairo. Does that relate to the two letters Chi and Rho?
Because it's a K, actually. It's Kairo.
Because it's very interesting. There's a lot of parallels here. If we talk about the story of Constantine, Cairo, through this sign you will conquer, right? So that speaks about auspicious time, auspicious ways, and being able to conquer through that. So
sure,
kind of an interesting idea.
It is. The key in the row. Basically looks like an X and a P. In fact, we were you see that all over Egypt. I've been to Egypt a couple of times. One time, me and Danny Newman, we were out there for something, and there was like a conference out there, and we were in the middle of nowhere. We were literally in BFE. It was like a 6-hour van ride to this place in a middle of nowhere in Hermopolis, the city of Hermes. So the epicenter of Thoth, Hermes Trismegistus, in that very spot. In fact, we went to the subterranean crypt of Thoth and the temple of Pedosiris, the funerary temple of Pedosiris. And it's really fascinating. Anyway, we were in some of those older sites, and I've been to other ones in Egypt where they were Christianized later, and they always put the key and the rho, and they put sometimes the alpha and the omega on either side of it as well. It's a cool little glyph. If you're into tattoos and stuff and you're a Christian, it would be a pretty cool tattoo. A key and a rho with the alpha and omega.
All together? That seems a little busy, but yeah.
I wish I could show. Yeah, it's a cool sort of glyph that they've written or that they've carved in a lot of the Egyptian temples that were Christianized. But
Interesting.
yeah, along with an equal armed cross. I don't know what type of cross you call that, but
Well, like a Swiss cross. Yeah, like a cross pate, I think it's called.
Yeah.
It's a Templar cross, basically.
Yeah, basically, right.
And so let me ask you this, because we started talking about weaving different things together, like myth, magic, and masonry, right? So you use a lot of that stuff in your book. So how would you respond to critics that say that, you know, masonry has no basis is kind of fundamentally incompatible with true occult initiation?
I would agree that you don't have to know anything about astrology, alchemy, Kabbalah, Hermeticism, Neoplatonism. You don't have to know anything about tarot or astrology or anything to be a Freemason. Freemasonry is its own discrete entity. It's its own body. It's its own system, and there is a system to Freemasonry that fits you as a living stone into that house not made with hands, eternal in the heavens. You know, we have a system for that basically divinizes you. You know, that is the apotheosis, an individual apotheosis through Masonry. And it says that in our stuff. You know, it says that we have.
Does it require some overt stuff on your part? I mean, just going through the initiations is good enough.
The initiations and the memory work, because you have to build your temple. That's why I say memory is our chief labor. If you're not doing memory, you're not doing Freemasonry. You know, you gotta be doing memory. And even if you're not an officer, you gotta know the catechism, you gotta know all that stuff, because look what they teach you in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, right? You have to know the passes at the toll houses. If you don't know those passes, if you don't know the catechism, you know, there's certain things that you say, like the Orphic mysteries, that you would say, they would say, I am a son of earth and starry sky. Grant me water from the lake of Memnosine that I might remember my life. That was on a gold lamella, like an Orphic lamella, right? This gold leaf. And these are funerary objects. These are things that you say as your soul is leaving the world, according to those traditions, right? It's heavy stuff. And I think we have a lot of that in Masonry. We equip ourselves with the means to navigate an afterlife, I think, in some ways, right? Because look what we talk about: the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, and the immortality of the human soul. And if you put that in the context of Masonry, then those are things, they're in Mackey, they're all over the place. The fatherhood of God, brotherhood of man, and the immortality of the human soul. That's in Oliver, that's everywhere. And I think that that's crucial, because that's part of it's part of the object and the project of metaphysical temple building, which is what Freemasonry is: metaphysical temple building. And it's actually, it could be other things, but that's the operative thing, is could. It could be other things, but it doesn't have to be. There's one thing it has to be, right? It could be a fraternal thing where you have, you know, nice dinners and copies and feasts. It could be something that you look at through the lenses of various occult systems. You could get into astrology, you could get into Kabbalah. You don't need it to be a Freemason. You don't need that for the Masonic project, despite the fact that I think a lot of that is in there anyway. Because if you look at Preston, he was a member of the Kabbalah Club in London, right? So there's some Kabbalistic vestiges in Masonic ritual, I think, that are there, and they're kind of visible, and that they were secreted there, right? I think there's some astrological stuff as well. Like, look at the man, the lion, the ox, and the eagle. Those are the 4 fixed signs of the zodiac, and they're the Lamassu of the Persians, or the Mesopotamian complex of cultures, right? I think Freemasonry, if you look in my first book, Myth, Magic, and Masonry, there's a whole chapter on astrological symbolism in Freemasonry. And I'm not making stuff up. You know, I mean, it's there. Now, you don't have to know about that to partake of the Masonic project, right? But and I wouldn't even say like I wouldn't even recommend that people do that. I wouldn't say, oh, you need to get into magic or you need to get into Solomonic magic and astrology and all this occulty stuff. I wouldn't recommend that to pretty much any Mason. Maybe it would have to be a certain type of person. And even then I would be like, this has nothing to do with Freemasonry, but you know,
You might
and I
find
bet
it interesting kind of thing. Yeah.
yeah, and I'll bet you that surprises a lot of people when I say something like that, because they get the impression that, you know, I'm all crazy about occultism, which is true, but not in the context of not necessarily in the context of Masonry. Yes, I do draw parallels, and yes, I've changed my mind on a lot of things. You know, that first book, it came out in 2018, and it had stuff from the preceding like 10 years. You know, and I've changed a lot since 2020, you know, night and day since 2020. Forget about 2018 and forget about, you know, 2010.
Right,
you know,
right.
like there's a lot of stuff in there, nothing too cringy, but there are some things where it's like, I don't believe that anymore, you know? And if you're not doing that, you know, if you're not growing in that way, you know, the problem is if you write a book, people are going to hold you to this stuff forever. And it's like, I don't care. I don't believe that anymore. You know?
Yeah, and you should have every right to move forward to that. Go ahead, Dave.
Right.
You're gonna put.
Well, yeah, that's part of the journey, right? If you're continuing to evolve and become a better man, better person,
Right.
One of the mantras of Masonry,
Yeah.
what you viewed as whatever it was in 2018, and you know that could certainly evolve, right?
Right.
Let's talk about a little bit of a lot of these traditional occult places, Rosicrucianism, Martinism, OTO, whatever it is. A lot of it is invite only. It's you can't express a desire to join. They have to look at you. They have to approach you. It sort of smacks of a lot of, or some at least, elitism of that kind. So how do we sort of reconcile the idea of a secret society model of knowledge with the need to actually, you know, like really bring this to the people? Because the information, right, if you want to think about a William Gibson, information wants to be free kind of thing, and yet we sort of guard the West Gate at the same time. That's always something I really struggle with in terms of like, why not make this available to whoever wants it or may need it? But at the same time, it's like, well, maybe they'll abuse it, or maybe they'll not ready for it, or whatever the case may be. So talk a little bit about that.
Whatever somebody's into or whatever they think they want to learn about, I mean, there's Google for that. You know, you can find every word that we have in Freemasonry that we're not supposed to tell anybody. All of those words are online. All the ritual is online. So it's like, if somebody wants to get into that, that's on them. But you know, and I'll tell people like at work, I'll have guys goof around. I'm in the trades, right? So I'm in lighting project management, commercial lighting project management. So I'll have cats at my work who work in the warehouse and stuff. And they're like, one guy tried giving me a grip one time. He's like, I got this Masonic grip. And I was like, and then he gave me a grip that I recognized, but I was like, where'd you learn that? That's wrong. You know, or, you know, I'll goof around like, you know, that's not a Masonic grip. That's like a queer grip. So that's what they do in like,
where's he gripping you?
Clandestine queer grip.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's funny you say that to some extent, and this maybe I'm treading on some weird territory here, but they said to some extent the idea of the Johannite church and stuff was a sort of a refuge for a lot of queer esotericists, and that was a very, I don't know if that's true or not, but there were sort of rumors that that's kind of a thing, or that was, you know, well, you might as well say that about the Catholic Church too, I suppose. But
Yeah.
In certain respects, in the clergy, there sort of the yeah. So are you familiar with the Gnostic Church or the Johannite Church? That's sort of the more religious part of the Gnostic tradition, where the
Not
occult
not
tradition-
not so much, but I am aware of a sort of the survival of the Gnostic heresy in Freemasonry and in Templarism. You're talking about the Johannite Church or the Johns, and of course we have our Saint John, right?
Sure.
And these are the Johns, and they are solstitial. Look where their feasts are. June 24th. What's it? June 24th and what? June 24th and December 27th.
Right.
And those are right on the solstices, basically within a couple of days. So there is this astrotheological Johannite thing in Freemasonry. Plus, man becoming better by his own works is a Gnostic heresy. Working on your ashlar is essentially a Gnostic heresy as well. That and check this out. This was sort of an observation I had a number of years ago. The grand architect of the universe is not God. He's a builder. He's a Gnostic demiurge. This is not God we're talking about. When we say the grand architect of the universe, we're talking about the creator entity, which is that's not Yahweh. That's not Jehovah. It's not, it's like some other being, right? And so yes, there's a major survival of Gnostic ideology in Freemasonry right at its core. And I think that's probably, despite the fact that they don't say this, I think that's the big problem that Catholicism and Orthodoxy have against Freemasonry. I'm Orthodox. I'm Greek Orthodox.
Oh, I'm Romanian Orthodox. Yeah.
Yeah. So I became Orthodox to marry my wife 20 years ago, and I was Catholic before that. But I love the Orthodox Church, and I go today. I'm a happy member. I want to get more involved, but it's something that I think it's a beautiful, beautiful tradition. I'm so glad that I wasn't even expecting this to be such a great ideological fit for me, but I love Orthodoxy, but I especially like. You ever read Death to the World?
No.
There's a magazine called Death to the World, and it's a lot of beautiful Orthodox stuff there. It was, in fact, a punk rocker magazine. These Orthodox, like punk rocker monks, if you could believe that. But yeah, it's really, really cool stuff. But anyway, so that's why maybe I think because of the survival of these Gnostic ideological components is why the Catholics and the Orthodox have a beef with Freemasonry and think it's incompatible, because we have our Gnostic demiurge, our Yaldabaoth, our grand architect of the universe. We have the Johns, our solstitial astrotheological stuff, and we have the doctrine of man becoming better by his own works, which is heretical.
So then how does that square with living a Christian life then? Or
because I believe there are certain planes I don't believe that these are apples and apples. I think that there's certain planes that we live on, right? And I don't have to square my dietary plane with my aesthetic plane. You know what I mean? Like there's domains of truth, and they're nested in one another, and they don't have to completely sync up or square up, I think, because they're not dealing with the same language. They're not dealing with the same suite of concepts, I suppose. So I don't I'm not finding any internal dissonance per se. And when I do find it, I address it. I try and think about it. But if I don't do that, I'm not going to cry either. I mean, it's it's I could sit with dissonance. Two things can be true at the same time, even if they seemingly negate each other. I try not to have that dissonance, but I've had it my whole life, in one form or another. I've done a lot of self-defeating stuff throughout my life. And and I don't know. It's it's something that's part of doing our work on ourselves, I guess.
I agree. So I'm looking at this Death to the World magazine, and I see a grand schema monk, or a great schema monk. About that, do you want to talk a little bit about that and maybe how that relates to esotericism?
God, I don't know a whole lot about the schema monks, but I think their outfits are super cool.
Aren't they?
Sure. Yeah.
You're talking about massive, it's got to be protection from evil and just I don't know if they're Enochian symbols or what they are exactly, but this is some beautiful, incredible stuff.
That Calvary cross with the stairway or the ladder and all the stuff, there's a bunch of cool imagery there. I'm not going to say I know what all of that means. I mean, I'm interested in it, but but there's a lot to learn, There's a lot to learn.
Do you feel like, for instance, and I'm going to talk to PD about about theurgy because I know he's got a new book on it. But this whole idea of reading and lecturing on alchemy and theurgy, right? So what's one, let's call it a sacred lie that gets told in Western magical currents, and what's the truth behind it? In other words, there's something that's said to the masses, and that's not what it is. Even in the secret teachings of Jesus, he speaks in parables to some extent, right? So you're getting a nuance of it, but you're not getting the thing. He only says the real thing to the ones who are the elect. So, what are the elect getting, in other words, that the masses are not getting?
Well, I mean, it could be techniques of spiritual transcendence. It could be theurgy. It could be telestiki. I like telestiki, which is like talisman making and statue animation. Animating is
like golems.
I don't know too much about. Is that a Hebrew thing? I don't know too much.
Yeah, that's where they basically create a huge clay monster, and then they put a prayer in its mouth, and it comes to life and starts kicking ass, and then they can't control it, and it runs amok and all kinds of other stuff.
Well, I mean, like in the Egyptian and Hermetic sense, like the Asclepius, it talks about statue animation where there was the opening of the mouth ceremony of like mummies and statues, and how you would enchant a statue and it would come alive, or you would ensoul it. Well, it's animating a statue. Anima is the soul, bringing a soul into, so the deity is there with you in the temple. Like every Egyptian, Hellenistic Egyptian temple had a sanctum sanctorum in the middle, and they had like a bark, and that they would have the statue, the genius of that temple, and they would take it out on a procession and things like that. And they, it's funny because you still see some of this like in India. I don't know anything about Eastern stuff, and frankly, I'm not into it. I'm not into let me talk about that for a sec, because this is,
go ahead.
and I'll get back. I'm a Westerner. Like, I grew up watching Popeye and eating TV dinners and, the Little Rascals and going to school and stuff and rock and roll and punk and stuff. So I don't know anything about karma, dharma,
Pharma or anything else.
Some pharma I know a little too much about, actually. But all that Eastern stuff, it's alien to me. That's not my operating system. What I find so sad in the West is that if you go anywhere and talk about esotericism, they're going to talk about Zen, meditation, karma. They're going to talk about Buddhism and things like that. This is your typical yoga and stuff. This is your typical like yoga mom entry into esotericism. Even if they get into theosophy, let's say, that's going to lead them right back through Blavatsky and into the Indian stuff, the tantra and what mantras and whatever. So I think it's sad that while I could walk around and be like, yoga, karma, whatever, and people know what I'm talking about, I can't walk around and be like, Rosicrucianism and Kabbalah. Nobody knows what that is, in the West. That's good. So, I mean, it's so rare to find that, right? So it seems like in the West, we have recourse to Eastern esotericism before we have recourse to Western esotericism, Hermeticism, Neoplatonism, Kabbalah, etc. And we have such a great and developed suite of traditions in the West that are esoteric that nobody avails themselves to that. They go straight into Zen Buddhism and Hinduism and yoga. And it's like, you're missing our own heritage, right? You're missing our own. My operating system is geared towards Western esotericism. It's like if you have a program, let's say your Mac or your PC, right? Some programs don't load on both. It only loads on one of them. There are certain programs that are going to load for me on my operating system, and they're Western esoteric programs. Eastern stuff, I think they're the wrong way drivers of consciousness. I think there's a lot of fundamental principles that I just don't get behind, and maybe that makes me ethno-chauvinistic or whatever. But I don't care, and I don't think that's true. But
is there a karmic tradition in the West? An idea of karma, of reincarnation, of that kind of thing, or do we just not?
Yes, yeah, we have metempsychosis. Metempsychosis is this Platonic and Neoplatonic tradition of the pre-incarnate human soul and its journey into incarnation. So yeah, we have a cyclical. You know who I like is Miche Eliade. Speaking of
Romanian paisan.
Exactly. So Miche Eliade, and who was the other guy who did Magic and Eros and Magic in the Renaissance? I forget his name. Another Romanian guy who got shot in the head in Chicago. Eros and Magic in the Renaissance. Corleanu, maybe.
Hang on. Johann
Culiano. Yeah. He's another Romanian. Those guys
got shot in the head?
Yeah, in Chicago. He was teaching in Chicago. He went into a bathroom stall, and somebody went over the side of the stall and shot him in the head. But he was vocal in opposition to the Iron Guard, and Miche Eliade was kind of fascistic and into the Iron Guard. I'm not making a value judgment on any of these guys. I don't even know really what the Iron Guard is, but I guess it was a nationalistic sort of thing.
Let me take a second and address that, because the Iron Guard, or the Legionaries, as they were called, Legionari, so it depends on your perspective here, right? So I would say they're a nationalist organization. There was a lot of hyper-nationalist organizations. Some people would say it's fascist. In hearing about it from my grandfather, who was one of the king's guard at the time, and then they basically, the king was hounded out of Europe, out of Romania by the legionaries. They were shooting at the train as he was leaving the country, and then he was brought back. The problem is they sort of merged two things, and that's Marshal Antonescu, who was the fascistic leader of Romania. He was a fascist, fully. He sort of utilized the nationalistic movement of the Legionaries or the Iron Guard to sort of meet his ends. Sure. Zela Codranu, which was the original guy of the Iron Guard, was purely a nationalist, cared about Romania, cared about the history of Romania, and so on. That then got waylaid by fascistic interests later on, after Quadraro was killed, this other guy, Horary, came up, and he was a fascist. So he sort of derailed the whole movement into a fascistic move. So, but again, as always, that's kind of what people remember. They don't really remember the roots. So it's a bit of a, it's a whole thing.
Sure. But also tie into Mussolini's Italy and to some degree Nazi Germany too.
Well, I mean, it was all, yeah, but see, that's the whole thing. This is where I quibble with people about the idea of, well, Nazism is not fascism. Nazism is socialism. I mean, it's the, in that respect, the bones of it, aside from the fact that it's militaristic, it's socialistic. It's not, fascism espouses a different philosophy. Not that one is better than the other. Please don't get me wrong. I think they're both bad.
They're both awful.
And they're both off target, in my opinion. Another idea of the Orthodox version of sin, right? So that's sinning in Orthodoxy is just you're off target. You need to find true against and hit the mark, which I think is a much more practical and sublime way of thinking about sin than the Catholic sort of way of having to categorize everything. But, that's just me.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'll get off my soapbox because this is about Jamie.
Well, Michi Eliade. He had some great ideas about cyclical. Well, we were talking about time earlier.
Right.
His whole idea in like the sacred and the profane, it's a theme that runs through all of his books, actually, about this cyclical time, eternal recurrence, the theme of eternal recurrence. Sometimes he says the myth of eternal recurrence. But it's that ionic time that we were talking about, that long scale kind of precessional time almost, or like, and it's also feeds into the Greco-Egyptian magical tradition as well, because they partake of the first time. So let's say you wanted to get your hair cut, right? They would have recourse to the myth of the first haircut, and they would reenact the first haircut, and you know what I mean? It would be like everything had its like the Pharaoh of Egypt, his day was like spent almost entirely in ritual actions. If you believe, what's his name? He's a great guy. He wrote the, oh man, I can't remember. He wrote Temple. Anyway, so he's talking about partaking of the first time, and that's the cyclical sort of thing, because it's seasonal and it's Ouroboros, basically. It just keeps going around, right? And we jump into this cycle that's already in motion for a time, and it's like it's mythic and it's cyclical. But then all of a sudden with Judaism, and I think this is kind of the first time you see this, you get chronic time, Chronos, Saturn, and the Jews. Saturday, it's Shabbat, right? And that's Saturn. It's on Saturn's day, and he's Chronos too, right? So he's with Judaism. All of a sudden, you get a beginning and an end. You get bracketed chronic time because you get a genesis, basically a cosmogenesis, and you get an eschatology. You get an end times. So this is the first time you find bracketed being, this ontologically bracketed experience of reality, right? As opposed to a cyclical eternal recurrence, with Judaism. And I think Eliade begins with Judaism being this chronic bracketed time, which is a staggering philosophical implication, right?
Yeah.
It's like,
absolutely,
it's nuts, and that blew my mind reading about that. So kind of thinking,
I just want to address that timepiece because we're talking about that the other day. We're saying a lot of the issues of, so Angelo DeLullo, who wrote a book called Awake, and he has a YouTube channel called Simply Always Awake. I pay a lot of attention to this guy. He espouses a non-dualistic tradition, non-duality.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Um,
Well, that's a
and
Gnostic. Yeah. Gnostics are, primarily dualistic, right? Materially dualistic. And don't you find that in a lot of Gnostic traditions? And that was Plotinus's beef with the Gnostics, was that they were dualistic.
Well, that's kind of the issue. And it's almost like it almost lends itself better to have a demiurge and then Satan that sort of are fighting each other, because they're more on the same plane rather than having an all-encompassing, omnipotent, omnipresent, and omniscient being fighting Satan. It's not even a question at that point. Like, it's not, Satan either works for him or he's completely ignored, because why bother?
Yeah, the scale is all wrong.
The scale's off.
And when we're talking about domains, of truth, if it's in a different scale or in a different domain, it's never going to square up. It's never going to sync up, right?
100%.
Yeah.
David?
So just circling back on a little bit of astrology question, this kind of came to mind. So you were talking about the planetary alignments, the planets, the natal charts and such. Do the planets kind of have like their own intelligence in a sense? Or, are they actually tied to individual fate, or is it more of like a collective destiny of everybody's soul, so to speak?
Both.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say both, because your nativity, this is according to the tradition. This isn't me like making stuff up. According to the tradition, the planets, they dispense like Hymarmene, which is your, that's kind of your fate, and it's on some scale or in some domain, it is fatalistic, but not on every plane, so it's one of those things where it's like there are contradictions, but they're not really contradictory, because they're kind of talking about different stuff. But yeah, there is, you have to accept a degree of determinism if you're going to study that sort of component of astrology. Let me say that. If you're studying that part of astrology, particularly maybe astrotheology and things like that, you have to accept some fatalistic ideas, some deterministic ideas, like astrology as it pertains to religion and even philosophy. I mean, but then there is also free will, right? Here's how I look at this. And I've changed my mind on this all the time. I might tell you something totally different tomorrow, but there's internal and external causation is how I view it right now. So and this is very Masonic once I get into this idea. Internal causation is based on my character. So when I work on my character, that's changing how I'm going to present myself or react to situations, let's say. At any given time, someone's actions are predicated on their character, right? Mm-hmm. People tend to act within the confines of their character. That's the best way to put it. People tend to act within the confines of their character in any given situation. And their character, you could see it in a natal chart. So there's astrology, right? If I get too much change back at the cash register, am I going to say something? Am I going to tell on myself? Or am I going to be like, oh, cool, more ice cream for me later or whatever? So that's a character issue. And that's depends on my natal chart and my nurturing of my, whatever. But then there's external causal forces, right? External causality. So we talked about internal causal forces. External would be like the bus that's going 60 miles an hour down a 25 mile an hour street with, a duck trying to cross the street or something like that. I mean, these are external causal forces in the world that that are beyond my control. But these are also astrological because you could see them in an astrological chart. You could see them in the current transits to natal placements. If natal placements are internal causal forces, the transits are external causal forces that are playing against. So we're constantly, I believe, we're constantly at the fulcrum, at the threshold, the liminal threshold of each internal causality and external causality. So it's compatibilistic. It's not fully deterministic and it's not fully free will. I think we're at this meeting point, the threshold of the internal and the external at any given time. So it's like we have to navigate the world, which we do, but largely by our character. But the world, presents all kinds of external curveballs and external forces. Like you are an external causal force in my life. You caused me to do this podcast and email, and like that was and Tim Hogan, calling you, call Jamie or whatever. But so you see what I mean? I think that's an important idea, and that's where I'm at with it right now. But I've changed my mind about that before too.
Well, I think you're talking about two things there, right? The Vesca Pisces and the Yin Yang. I mean, that's kind of where we're talking with it, where you're at the precipice of these, or at the borders of two things, and right. You sort of oscillate between the two.
Right. Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, or we're always at that point where it's like that's the intersection of reality. I mean, that's where that's X marks the spot. There's these two axes that meet at that place, and that place is the moment of being. That's the chironic moment, but it'd be for better or worse.
I love it. Dave, you have any final questions? I want to ask him about some of his services and stuff like that.
No, I think one last question. Would you say, in your opinion, estimation, I know we briefly just touched on this, when it pertains to the ego, do you think that in order to reintegrate, become one with the universe, that sort of thing, do you actually need to have the death of the ego, or is it more of a spiritual death?
No, I hate when
refinement.
No, I can't stand that talk of like, it's such a hippified notion of like death of the ego and stuff like that. I don't know. You need your ego to live. Everybody knows that. I think, all right, here's kind of how I think about that is, egocentrism could be a problem, right? Because look, if you have the guy who's the life of the party, who's like swinging his shirt around and, lampshade on his head, and he's up on the coffee table, he's the center of the action. That cat is sort of egocentric, right? But so is the wallflower who's like in the corner reading her book, hoping nobody talks to her, totally self-centered. Like, can you imagine somebody slapping the book out of your hand? Why are you being so self-centered and up in your head? You're at a party. Both of those are egocentrism. Both of those are ego problems, right? So it's finding balance. I guess the mean, Aristotle's mean, is kind of so. And the ego is a central tool of experiencing reality. You need the ego to navigate life. I mean, if you killed your ego, you'd be a vegetable. And you'd have no causal influence. You wouldn't be a force in the world. I mean, yeah, I think it's one of the dumbest things we hear lately. People talking about ego death and stuff. Now, I can understand if they mean ego realignment or a massive paradigm shift in the perspective of their ego. I think that's kind of probably what people mean, but they don't know the words. They don't know how to talk about things.
Very cool. I really want to ask you about the services that you offer, and obviously the books that you've put out. You put out a fair amount of books. What do you recommend in terms of like, if people want to get started with you, what should they read? What should they get into?
If you're a Mason, you should probably read Archetypal Temple. That's my third book. And it's really a collection of shorter essays, good bathroom reading. So I would probably do that. If you're into more esoteric stuff, like some of the stuff we were talking about today, maybe go to my first book, Myth, Magic, and Masonry. I talk about a lot of the astrotheology and stuff, some of the ground that Robert Hewitt Brown was mining, in terms of the Hiramic legend as an astrological allegory, which is really cool stuff. Yeah, it's insane. It blew my mind when I first read Robert Hewitt Brown. I kind of used that as a springboard for my studies years and years ago now, talking about that stuff, and some of it ended up in Myth, Magic, and Masonry. But if you're just into astrology and magic and general occultism and stuff, and Solomonic magic and the real stuff, you should check out my book that's coming out September 9th. It's coming out on Inner Traditions Press, which is like, they're one of the biggest mind, body, spirit. But this is my first like major book deal. Was in
Congratulations.
Yeah. Danny Newman helped me with that. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. So Inner Traditions is really great. It's called the Astrological Goetia. And I've made some observations that nobody in the literature, and I've looked at all of it, nobody in the literature has like pointed these things out. And there's some pretty crucial stuff that directly relates to a lot of the stuff we've been talking about today.
Yeah, it says pre-order the hardcover.
Yeah.
You and Mark Stavish are doing it.
Mark Stavish did the forward or whatever.
Oh, he did the forward? Okay, got it.
Yeah.
And I see that I really want to read Angels in Vermilion. That sounds pretty freaking awesome. I know that's P.D. Newman's book, but you did the intro to it, right? So
yeah. Yeah, that's a great one. Definitely worth reading. If you're a Mason, you got to read his Alchemically Stoned, though. That's his big thesis there with the acacia. You know what I'm talking about?
I do. I know exactly what you're talking about, because acacia and then mimosa nervosa, because we're talking about DMT and yeah, Masons won't talk about that. They will not. They will. In fact, I mean, there's some of this stuff's going to go on their actual YouTube page, on the Grand Lodge's YouTube page. They're trying to talk more about Masonry and trying to bring in more people into Masonry, but I can't put something like that up there. There's no question.
Yeah.
Just say that would not be. And could you talk a little bit about the things you offer in terms of astrology or tarot?
Yes. So if you get on my website, which is JaimePaulLamb.com, it's my name.com, and my name is spelled
the bio.
Yeah, JaimePaulLamb.com. You can check out my astrological and tarotic offerings. For astrology, I do natal chart readings. I'll check your transits. I'll answer any horary question, any question answered. I will help you calculate your daimon and its name. We could do tons of stuff, and that's all. Here's a unique offering I have. I look at your chart. I'm a musician, so I look at your nativity, and I use correspondences, and I can play your nativity on a harmonium, like play the sound of your nativity using correspondences, planets, and the planets, the zodiac, and their intervals on the their intervals are the aspects, those lines that connect it, like certain planets inscribe certain polygonal images on the ecliptic, like a equilateral triangle, etc. But you could play all that stuff, and you play the modes are each associated with a particular planet. And I've never seen anybody offer that. Talk about Pythagorean. Talk about universal musicalis or whatever, universalis. Musica Universalis, or the harmony of the spheres. Yeah, it's a very Pythagorean offering in that I play this out of your natal chart and I send you an MP3 of it. So, and that's only $60. That's only $60. I should charge double that, but it's not like hard for me to do. So and it only takes me about like less than an hour. But
Interesting.
But I charge.
Well, these
60.
sound like some really cool offerings, man.
Yeah.
Well, we want to really thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Yeah.
The 2 hours have absolutely flown by. I feel like we've had some amazing discussions. We've gone super deep.
Yeah.
And I think people are going to be playing this one over and over again to really get the full squeeze the juice out of every morsel of what you've been saying, because there's so much. So I really want to thank you, Jaime, for everything, my brother. And we hope to have you back on again one of these days to talk about other stuff, because I feel like we've still got so much to delve into. But this has been absolutely incredible.
Brothers, I want to thank you. I want to thank you so much for having me on, and it's been really great. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I appreciate it.
You too.
So much.
You too. All right. Well, until next time, this has been Brothers of the Arcana. I am Alex Aldea.
I am Dave Ferrigno. God bless.
And Jaime Paul Lamb. Thank you so much. Until next time, we'll see you.
Bye-bye.